this is Paul Baines of GreatDad.com, the website for fathers, because as we know, dads don't always think like moms. And if you're just tuning in, Great Dad Talks is a series of weekly conversations with new and expert fathers, all with a point of view on modern parenting. And I'm just always amazed by how much parenting has evolved since even when I got started just 21 years ago, and curious as to what people are thinking today. And you can find more about my resources at GreatDad.com, or all the resources at GreatDad.com, but my coaching at GreatDad.com/coaching. And we just started a book club that you can find at GreatDad.com/books. And there you can get some access to some books, and we'll be having weekly meetings around some of the themes in those books. So look for that, and hope to see you there soon. And today I'm talking to Cornelius Grove about a subject that's important to, I think, all fathers as they think about their kids' education. I mean, education is such a part of our legacy as parents. So welcome, Cornelius Grove.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be joining you and your listeners from Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah, okay, that is great. I lived in Brooklyn and loved Brooklyn. Love the vibe in Brooklyn, though I understand it's changed from what I see on TV. It's changed quite a bit since I lived there in the 90s. You've written a series of books: The Aptitude Myth, The Drive to Learn, A Mirror for Americans. Those are the three that we're going to talk about today, that really focus in on, well, first of all, about what aptitude is, but then the cultural differences that using the Asian as in Asia, the continent, and how the Asians approach education to draw differences between the way we learn in the United States. Maybe we should, let's start with the aptitude part first, because I think that is so important and has been talked about since the origin of the SAT, which has really put more of a focus on aptitude versus grades, and what you learned about aptitude and what you call the aptitude myth. Could you talk about that first?
I'd be happy to. Yes. Well, this book is, I think, not quite what you think it is. This book is a history book. It literally ends on the day the SAT was first administered. Mm-hmm. You might say in some ways it's the history of the SAT, but that's not really accurate, because I was looking at something else. What I was looking at, I'm trained sort of as an anthropologist. I'm really an interculturalist. Anybody who's an interculturalist takes a lot of anthropology courses, and I have a doctorate from Columbia, so I did get into that pretty well. And one thing I know as an educator who is interested in anthropology or vice versa, is that it's been known for a long time by anthropologists, beyond discussion, this is not debatable anymore, that Americans tend to believe that the reason a student does well or not so well in school is their inborn aptitude. Now, it turns out that in many other parts of the world, probably most of the world, that's not what people believe. They know that there is something called aptitude or intelligence, whatever word you'd like to use. And they know that has some bearing on the issue of children's performing well in school, but that's not what they think makes the difference. They think the difference is due to the child's committed effort or the lack of it. Mm-hmm. Now, as somebody who's not quite an anthropologist, but writes about anthropology a great deal, I knew that this was very characteristic of the U.S., also that it made the U.S. rather different from the rest of the world, and starkly different from some parts of the world, such as East Asia, just to take one part of the world that I know well. And I wondered where this came from. And I figured that the way to go about this was not as an interculturalist, but as a historian. So I used to teach history in high school. So I put on my historian's hat and I began to dig into, where does this come from? What's the origin of this? And I thought, well, it's probably going to be Jean-Jacques Rousseau. That's probably where this comes from. No, completely wrong. He's a bit player in this story. And obviously, we don't have time to talk about this in great detail, but I had to keep pushing back in time across the centuries, and I finally ended up in ancient Greece. And it turns out that the aptitude myth originated with Aristotle.
Okay.
Aristotle, in one of his major publications called Physics, was discussing how human beings grow and develop. And he believed that everyone is born with an internal, already set internally, whatever they were going to eventually become.
Mm-hmm.
When you read about this in academic books, they talk about teleology, that this was sort of foreordained. It's almost like predestination in Christianity. It's very similar to that in that whatever happens has already been determined.
Right.
Well, the thing about Aristotle was that he thought that this not only applied to the physical and physiological body, it also applied to the mind. And if you think about it for the moment, you can understand, anybody can understand, I think, that if this is all set at the beginning, before, by the time you've come out of your mother's womb, then what's the use of studying? Certainly, what's the use of studying hard? Because how well you're going to do is already a given.
Yeah.
So from that point, I come forward, pretty much skipping the Dark Ages because not much happened then that's pertinent to this topic. And I came up through, yes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau certainly played a role here, and other people who you've heard of, I guess. But the real surprise to me was when I discovered who was the person who, more than any other single one, took this idea of inborn intelligence and introduced it to Americans and made it stick. And that person was a British philosopher named, I'm going to block on his name, Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer, I had heard of him before. After all, I have a college degree, but I didn't hear much. But he is a major player in this story. And in this book, The Aptitude Myth, Socrates gets half a chapter and Herbert Spencer gets 2 chapters. He's very, very important in this. And the reason he's so important is not so much that he stressed, that aptitude, that things are inborn, and that there's really no point in studying hard. In fact, he was very much against studying hard and said so. But because he became very popular in the United States, we're talking now about the 1870s, 1880s. At that time, the Americans were were establishing their schools, their common schools. And people were eager to learn how do we deal with students? How should we go about this? They were hungry for this. And he came over, he sailed over. Remember, they're not on airplanes in those days. He sailed over and on a number of occasions, and he gave lectures, many, many lectures around the country. And around 1865 or 1870, he published a little book, just a little thing. You can still buy it. It's called Education. That's the name of it, Education. And he very astutely pushed these ideas in education, and they stuck. And so between Aristotle and Herbert Spencer, we have this strong belief. Now, the subtitle of this book is How an Ancient Belief Came to Undermine Children's Learning Today. And that ancient belief is Aristotle's belief as promoted by Herbert Spencer and others. I mean, it's just not those 2 guys, but we only have a few minutes here. Those were the key players.
So a few questions there was Aristotle's belief in what happened in Greece different than what happened in other cultures at the same time in India or the Persian culture, or I guess we'll get into the Asian cultures. Was that nowhere to be found in the ancient world that you found?
I'm honestly, I don't know the answer to that. India plays a small part in the story. People back then, I tell you, the first person I talk about is not Aristotle, but Pythagoras. People were very fascinated by mathematics and about how mathematics seemed to relate to what they were seeing in the heavens and the stars at night. And it came to be believed that the most perfect way to understand something was through contemplation. So there was a great deal of interest in the mind. And Aristotle, was a part of this, but he was extremely influential. Mm-hmm. And down through Western history, from Aristotle's time and on up until about 1500, in many areas of academic belief, which in those days were very similar to religious belief, the Roman Catholic Church, for people to judge whether what the opinion you had was correct or not correct, how would they judge that? They'd say, well, is this what Aristotle teaches? If it is, then it's correct, and if it's not, then you're guilty of error. So there was that simple. That was the test. Was it congruent with Aristotle? So he carried a huge influence.
And did predetermination, predestination, free will, did that play a role in the story of how we?
Well, yes, it gets discussed. I do discuss predestination a little bit, but it's these are sort of parallel track things. And not only in the book, but all of my books have a website. So the website for this book is I'm sorry, wrong book. The website for this book is is the aptitudemyth.info. And I ended up finding that there were sort of 6 trains of thought. They kick in at different times. The first one was Aristotle, or actually, I haven't looked at it for quite a while. Might even be Pythagoras. And these are traced all the way. Eventually, there are 6 of them. Some of them are religious, such as Calvinism.
I wanted to ask you about that.
And I trace these all down to 1926. Basically, the idea here, the big idea is that what you are born with has enormous influence on what you become able to accomplish in your life. And it wasn't just Aristotle and it wasn't just Spencer, but there were other influences along the way, such as Calvinism and predestination and so forth, that sort of cemented this in people's minds. The thing about it is, the reason I got interested in this is many of, in the international comparative tests, which have been going on since the late 1960s, the American students have never done well. They're not at the bottom, although sometimes in some subjects they're pretty close to the bottom. They're always in the middle, maybe a little above the middle. But there are other cultures, and in particular, and we're going to be talking about the East Asia here in a little while. East Asians are always at or near the top in these tests. And I thought that, this needs some explanation. Why is this? I think a part of the explanation is that many people in the United States think that hard work, hard studying doesn't make a difference, or doesn't make much of a difference.
Well, before we go on to that, I do want to ask about John Calvin's role in all this, because as you're just saying, is that there's this dichotomy. It sounds like there is this belief that of American exceptionalism, that we are hardworking. We believe we largely, whether you call it the Protestant work ethic or not, there is a work ethic that's part of the American culture, or was for a large part of our history. And that seems to be in opposition to the idea I mean, we're the country of the self-made man, the guy who came from nowhere. But was that based on the fact that we had the aptitude for it, or that the hard work ethic?
I would rather see the educational implications of this. I would say that they are an anomaly in this. Education seems to be accepted, an exception. Now, I point out to you, and this isn't my original idea, many others have done this. If you want to go to a high school or a middle school and you want to see students working hard, where do you go? You go to the sports fields.
Yeah.
That's where they work hard. That's where they drill and practice. That's where their coaches correct them and insist that they do things a certain way and have them practice until they get it right. And their parents are behind that, and their parents go to the games and cheer, and they buy them whatever they want, their equipment, their balls, their hoops, whatever. And a lot of effort and money is put into this. In East Asia, that kind of enthusiasm goes toward learning. Here, we want children to be well-rounded.
Yeah.
And well-rounded include, yes, you should do well in your courses, but hey, you should be playing some sports, you should be joining some clubs, you should be having a good time with your friends, you should maybe doing some community service, or, on and on. And I am not, please people, I am not against being well-rounded. My message is, if you are really disturbed about how poorly American students learn, and this isn't just told from the international test, but also from our own tests, and people periodically, Congress, they're very concerned about this, but ACE students isn't what most people want.
Yeah.
It is what the East Asians want. The aptitude myth, the idea that it doesn't matter if you study hard, contributes to this. It's not the whole story.
Okay.
Yeah, it contributes to it. Yeah. It's not the whole story.
Okay, so we're establishing that there is a mythology in America toward hard work paying off, but that goes in opposition to what the educational.
It doesn't seem to apply much in education. Of course, it does for individual families.
Right, but it's in your mind, it's the education system or the education philosophy that is slightly off.
I wouldn't say it's the education system so much as the way people think about children's academic learning.
Yeah.
Children's academic learning is not highly prioritized. Notice I said not highly prioritized.
Right.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
It is not a passion for most families. It is not the top priority for most families.
Okay. Well, then let's move on to that, the East Asia example. And I would guess that there are other cultures that you could probably draw attention to that do prize academic learning.
Well, certainly the East Asians are not the only one. So easily, for me at any rate, living in Brooklyn maybe comes to mind. The people from a Jewish background tend to be very committed to learning. This is very important to them. And of course, we have immigrants coming in, and many of them, who wins the spelling bee year after year after year after year? It's the Indians, the immigrants.
Most educated of the Indians who come over here and
this is very, very deeply important to them. Important to them in a way that I think even excels what many families feel about school sports.
Yeah.
It is a real deep passion. It is extremely important. It defines who the family is. It gives the family, the whole family, not just the kid, the whole family, the extended family, including the family back in the old country, it gives them honor when a student does really well academically.
Mm-hmm. So what is that Do you put any value judgment on those two systems, or are you mostly trying to explain that there is a difference here in how we orient ourselves?
The value judgment I am making is this. We Americans periodically like to, let me not say like to, we are accustomed from time to time to getting very upset about how well or how poorly our children are doing in math and science and technology and history, these academic courses. and I am fully with them. I mean, I am trained as an educator. I have taught at secondary and university levels. With my own children, what does it mean to be a good dad? Well, even here in Brooklyn, or maybe especially here in Brooklyn in public schools, they absolutely refused to have children drill on such things as the math tables. This was anathema to a lot of educators and parents. They wouldn't do it. So we did it at home. I am very grateful that when I grew up, I was made to learn these things well. People weren't terrified of drilling yet in those days. But, when you know something extremely well, like some of the basics of math or science or whatever, when you know those basics extremely well and they become second nature to you because you have gotten them down through effort, then as you get into the more difficult parts, things tend to be easier. You know what? You don't have to pull out your phone and do a calculation. You just do it.
Right.
So we choose not to go this route. And then we say we're very concerned.
So how do you balance those things in your knowledge with the drive? I think in America today, the big debate is, our kids, are they working too hard? Are they not getting enough enjoyment? Are they not learning how to be happy?
Well, you hit part of it there. It is important to us in education. This is very characteristic of American education. We want children to enjoy it. We want them to have fun in the classroom. We make schools attractive, and we have all kinds of things that we add on, like swimming pools and huge sports fields and so forth. And I'm not saying these are bad things. I'm saying these are evidence of a culture in which academic learning is not the highest priority. And then we beat our breasts and say, oh my God, they're not learning very well academically. And my message is, well, what did you expect? Huh? What did you expect? Yeah. You don't give it a very high priority. You're more concerned that they be well-rounded and that they have fun in school. Yeah. Yeah. The people who are doing better with us don't think of it that way. Let me tell you a story. When I wrote The Drive to Learn, it came time at the end for me to get for my publisher, which is Rowman and Littlefield, to get for my publisher a cover photograph, right? The author finds these photographs or takes these photographs, whatever. They supply the photograph one way or another. So The Drive to Learn is about parenting with education in mind. It's about it's about all of this from the parent's point of view. And what I needed was a photograph of one or two parents at home, that was very important, with children who were clearly studying. And this was an important, serious task, right? So I know about stock houses, and I went in and looked for, so you put in, okay, parent and student studying together. Oh, well, thousands of photographs. You have this huge, and you know what's happening in every single one of them? They're having fun.
Yeah.
They're having fun at home. They are laughing. They are smiling. They're in front of a computer, ha ha, whatever. I mean, this is how it's got to be in the United States. Learning must be fun. So how did I get this photograph? I hired a photographer. I hired an adult and a child actors,
Yep.
and I set it up, and we had a photo shoot. And that's where this picture comes from, because there was no other way to get a picture in which parent and student, both side by side, pencil in hand, were working on a academic task where the parent was with the child, not just encouraging the child, but with the child. This is the kind of thing that goes on in East Asian families. And I had to create it because it simply didn't exist at American stockhouses.
Yeah, I thought that's where you were going to go, because I've done that same search, and what I was going to say is that most of the pictures that you find today of people in that situation, because they now do exist, but they're Asian families, because there are a lot more of opportunities to take that kind of.
Well, the other thing, if you look at what's available at American stockhouses on almost any topic you choose, people are laughing or smiling. Extremely hard to find a picture of something ordinary going on where people aren't having a good time. Well, this is part of our culture.
Yeah, but it does bring up the value thing. I think it's important to understand, but the only other school system I have experience with is the French school system, where the kids also, they work so hard. They're divided up at the end of eighth grade to determine whether they will go on an academic track or basically some sort of manual arts or technical vocational technical track. And then they work so hard to pass their baccalaureate at the end of the time. Yeah. And many of them feel they gave up their childhood, and college for them is usually a lot easier. It's not, those 4 years are not considered as hard as high school. And it's a different value orientation.
It is. This is what it's about. It's about values. Ultimately, it is about values. That's exactly right.
And I think it's so important for parents to realize what you're saying is that in a lot of school situations that they may choose without thinking it through, that there is this different value orientation. If you go to a regular public school in the United States and you're expecting an Asian style or even a French style education,
you're not going to get it.
Probably not going to get there.
There may be some specialized schools, and I'm just thinking, you may have heard here in New York City, we have a few specialized schools. Stuyvesant is the one that people usually hear about. I suspect that there's a lot of pretty much hard work going on in some of those. But in general, we have to deal with generalizations here, not individual schools. Mm-hmm. You're not going to find an expectation in most high schools that the young people work really hard, a lot of studying, drilling, getting it right. When we talk about education in this country, the word we like to use is proficiency. Yeah. In East Asia, the word they like to use is mastery.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that is the subtle message that you get quite often is that if you don't pick up the trumpet and play it pretty good the first time, you might as well not bother to get any better at it than that.
Yeah.
So what kind of advice do you have for parents who are in this situation, looking either toward Asia or toward other cultures and wanting that for their kids? Is there any change in the orientation that they can give, or setting examples? Or
let me say first of all that I've written these books because I'm concerned about American education, but I do not think, certainly not on the basis of anything that I could do or that I could write or that I could speak to on these interviews that I have, that the culture isn't going to change. Mm-hmm. The overall culture of the United States is set. However, the good news, that's the bad news. The good news is, I believe, that parents still have some control here. I'm sorry to say this, but they can't decide they're going to really begin to push academics when they've got a C student in the 10th grade. It's too late. Yeah. I'm sorry. But for young parents, with, starting out, kids are still coming very young. It is possible, I think, for them to treat for the family and hopefully the extended family to take a stance, an attitude to express consistently values about learning that really strongly prioritize learning as something that's important for the entire family. Not just in terms of, okay, young person, you can get a better job when you grow up and probably live in a nicer neighborhood if you study hard. I'm not disagreeing with that, but you know where that comes from? That comes from here. That's an intellectual, that's a good idea. And it is a good idea. I'm not disagreeing with it. The difference is in East Asia, the way they present themselves is it comes from here. It comes from the heart. It's a passion. And if a parent, I think, can adopt this, and actually toward the end of this book, I have a few suggestions, then I think if they maintain that with consistency, which I think doesn't necessarily mean that their student can never participate in a sport. It doesn't necessarily mean that their child can never go to a sleepaway, an evening with their friends. But
that's the classic. Those are both the two classic arguments that you hear from Asian families who are successful in the United States, who are maybe more recently first generation, second generation Americans, is that that's the trade-off. They look at the dichotomy, and I think a lot of parents say, it's either or. Either I'm going to be like that really studious Asian family who has eliminated sports. The kids can never do theater. They could do a classical instrument, perhaps, never a sleepover. They have to be completely focused. And versus the other extreme, which is maybe fun all the time. And they don't know how to modulate between something that maybe is a miserable experience for a child versus something that maybe is still a good.
Well, the thing about it is in the Asian families, whether they're immigrants or in East Asia, the experience isn't, I don't think we can conclude that the experience is necessarily miserable for all the children.
Yeah.
They live in East Asia, at least.
But you hear the stories where these kids are like, they're in school from like 8 to 10 at night, and they are just completely driven by this notion of success. I think that's the horror story that a lot of parents hear. They don't want to go that far.
Well, this is, I understand. I agree. I'm not necessarily taking a point of view here. I think ultimately the point of view that I'm taking is how your family prioritizes education and what that leads to in terms of your child's work, study, committed study will have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there are many other factors. Believe me, I'm a social scientist. Many things come into this. But how the parents organize this from day one, from a very young age of the child. One of the things that anthropologists know, for example, is that many middle-class parents are very interested in how fast their child is learning when they're very young, and they get all kinds of educational toys, and they work with them, and they send them to things like, Little Mozart and Little Einstein classes, if they can afford that kind of thing. But what seems to happen is when they finally put them in school, the parents tend to say, okay, it's the teacher now, and we are supporters. We are facilitators. We're not driving this process anymore. In East Asia, the parent drives the process.
Well, that's a completely different orientation. If you're old enough to have sent your kids all the way through secondary school in the United States, you realize that the schools do not want your involvement in your child's education.
It's not so much that the parents. It's not so much that the parents are involved in school in East Asia. In fact, they tend to stay away. Those are professionals, you know. This is the opinion of many cultures. You know, educators are really professionals, and we don't necessarily, you know, if they discipline my child, well, you know, I did my dissertation on Portuguese immigrant students in the United States, and they would say, well, you know, I don't care if the teacher disciplines my child. I assume there was a good reason for it. The only way I'm going to show up at school is my child comes home bloody.
Yikes.
Okay. So anyway, I forgot where I was going before I got off.
Creating the culture for the parents and what the parents can specifically do.
The extended family culture really needs to be behind this. Everybody supporting this, everybody actively caring about it. Every parent's willing to actually frequently each week to sit down with the student and look at what's going on. One of the things that it's well known that East Asian parents do is they buy the same textbooks that the students are using, and they read the textbooks so they're just a little bit ahead of the student, and they're able to discuss it with them and make sure that they understand this. And what happens when a student brings home a grade that's not so good? Well, in East Asia, that is the beginning of a discussion. What didn't you understand? Let's diagnose this. Let's sit down and see just what you didn't get right. You missed this point. You didn't drill sufficiently on this or whatever. You've got to correct that. So next time you will never make this mistake again. That's the way our children are dealt with by coaches, athletic coaches. Yeah. Not so much by parents at home.
Yeah, but it's also interesting that goes against the current demonization of what we call helicopter parents. Like there's a very big cultural trend now to say, no, hands off the kid. You need to develop an independent child. If you help them too much, if you're too involved, now you're doing it the wrong way and enabling or disenabling them as individuals. It's an art. Or is it an art for the parent to be both helpful and?
I think that this perspective isn't so much helicoptering, but being with the child in learning. It's not standing back and said, you can't do this, and are you doing all right, and do you need anything from me, or whatever helicopter parents do. I don't think we did that with our kids. It's about we as a family are ensuring that you are learning things to mastery. Let's sit down and see what you learned today. Have you really got this mathematical concept down? Do you understand this historical relationship that you discussed in class yesterday? It's not, I haven't thought about it, but offhand, I don't think it's helicoptering, but being with the student as a fellow learner, yeah, and ensuring that they get it right. Now, I don't think many American parents really want to do this.
No, they're very time pressed themselves.
I'm just saying that here is the explanation for why our students aren't doing well.
Yeah.
And so let's stop complaining about it. This is basically the way we are. This is our culture. And we would have to make really massive changes in this culture for academic learning to be prioritized the way apparently we think it ought to be, ideally, but we're not willing. Most of us are not willing to go there. Mm-hmm. Not to that extent.
It is
proficiency. That's good. Proficiency.
It is interesting when you talk about that in terms of one of the big, I think, big confusions or challenges for a lot of mothers and fathers is developing or continuing a relationship with their kids beyond the preteen era, and how to stay connected to them. The classic, what did you do in school today, or how was school today, at getting a answer and not being able to any longer carry on a conversation. And it brings to mind that the more you are invested in what they're actually doing, if you could be reading the same book they're reading in English, or have just studied the same chapter in math, suddenly you've got a way to talk to them and carry on a conversation that isn't as classically parent-child, boring, dumb, stupid, meaningless to them.
Yeah, just showing an interest.
Yeah. Yeah.
We gotta show an interest. We gotta be sure they're okay. I mean, we're not all the way to helicoptering here, but are they okay? Are they doing well? They getting along with their friends? Any problems in class? Tell us about it. We'll discuss it. That's not all the way to this. That's good. It's good for what it is. I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying you want people who really really master academic topics, then you've got to change your values and you've got to change your behavior to some extent.
Yeah.
And you've got a much better chance. I'm not saying can't guarantee anything, of course, but
Right.
So let me just say something about the Mirror for Americans. This is about what goes on in classrooms, and I can boil down basically at the end of this. By the way, I want your list. I don't know, are people actually looking, or are they?
We do this on YouTube and on podcasts.
Oh, good. These books are not thick. You know what? Each one of them is only about 150 pages. These are not big tomes. I write for ordinary people. I read scholarly research, and I put it in terms that anybody with a couple of years of college usually can understand. That's my mission. I believe that anthropologists have really found things that are of great use to us, and the problem is that anthropologists only talk to each other. So I'm listening in their conversations, and I'm sharing that with the general public. What anthropologists found about East Asian schools, now we're not talking about families anymore, we're talking about teaching. I only looked at the elementary, at the primary, at preschool and primary school. And basically it boils down to this. In the United States for several decades now, and I wouldn't hazard a guess of when this started, but it's been going on for quite a while, we are very concerned that schools be student-centered. And God forbid that any individual teacher or any school be branded as teacher-centered. That is bad with a capital B. No, it's got to be student-centered. School districts have deputy superintendents to ensure that everything is student-centered. .orgs, organizations about education sometimes have vice president for student-centeredness. This is very important. So how do they think about this in East Asia? The answer is this: they don't think about it. They're not interested in this. Student-centered, teacher-centered, what is this all about? Their classrooms, Paul, are knowledge-centered.
So I thought that we were moving more in a direction based on No Child Left Behind and similar programs like that for standardized classes, and the complaint was more that the teacher had lost control of the curriculum and could not tailor it to the child or the experience, but that it was all now so structured that there was very little freedom.
All I can say is that over decades, many decades now, there have been countless school reforms.
Yeah.
And, there's the one you just mentioned. There have been, in our lifetimes, there have been several reforms in mathematics and in governance of districts and on and on. There's just been so many reforms, but not much changes, Paul. That's the reality. And the problem is that these reforms, in my considered opinion, aren't addressing the problem. The problem is the culture. The problem is the values by which Americans, most of them, think about education and the learning that children do and their capacity to learn. In my view, this is what is holding us back.
Yeah. Is this is the judgment about aptitude setting the course?
That's part of it.
Yeah.
That's part of it. We just really don't listen. Spencer, remember Herbert Spencer? We talked about at the beginning. Herbert Spencer thought that hard study actually damages children, physically damage. He said that girls who study hard are disfigured and flat-chested and are unlikely to be able to get married if they study hard. Can you believe this? This is in the book Education. It's written down. I mean, it's amazing how we have actually not wanted children to study too hard, or very hard at all. Yeah. So, okay, fine. You don't want it. You're afraid it's going to damage them. Okay, so stop worrying about the fact that they don't learn stuff very well.
Yeah, but back to where we started was about our legacy as parents and our values as parents and transmitting our values as parents. I mean, for some people, learning, certainly in this current climate, there are a lot of people who don't believe in learning or intelligence or any kind of factual basis at all. But for those of us who do, it sounds like this is just the classic, again, back to the classic parenting challenge, which is to actually focus on the things that matter. Is it as easy as trying to keep that front and center?
You could put it that way. I think that East Asian parents, and I only talk about East Asian parents because I've spent several years reading mounds and mounds. By the way, let me just give just 30 seconds of background here. When America, on the very first instance, when American students scored in the middle of the international test and East Asian scored at the top, that began a round of research, which then burgeoned, so that now, 50 years later, there are, I confidently estimate, over 1,000 research-driven books and journal articles about why East Asian students learn so well. And that is where these books come from. I based my work entirely on that research, most of which is anthropological in nature. I mean, people went over there, they sat in classrooms, they talked to parents, they observed in homes, and they tried to figure out, why are these kids doing so well in school? Because when the Americans first, fell way behind in the international test, everybody was stunned. Well, everybody knows we have the best schools in the world. How in the world could this happen? There must be something wrong here. So let's go do some research. And so they did.
Yeah. Well, it's really very sad that neither one of us can fix this problem with something that sounds like it's been ingrained within our Western culture for 2,000 or 2,500 years. It sounds.
It's deep in the culture, and this is why it's not easy to deal with.
Yeah.
I maintain that parents can have an influence, and it depends very largely on how they prioritize academic learning and how they are with the student, not just approving, not just smiling and making sure they did their homework, but they really serve in the same capacity as an athletic coach. They make sure they get it right. Yeah. And most parents don't want to do that, but they can, and if they will, probably there's going to be a significant difference.
Yeah, and like you say, it starts out very, very early in terms of, I'm sure, the modeling and that helping attitude and developing those own habits within the parent themselves.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, this has been an interesting conversation, not going exactly in the direction that I was thinking of, but really brings up a lot of questions just of cultural differences and our values as a country and our values as parents. So Cornelius Grove, thank you for spending that time with me today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate to be included.
And the 3 books are The Aptitude Myth, The Drive to Learn, and A Mirror for Americans. I'll put those in the show notes, and you can obviously search them all there.
And each book has a website. And the website is the name of the book, .info.
Okay, so and the Drive to Learn is the one that is the most specific to what parents can do versus the educational system.
So the drive to learn.info.
Right. Okay. So thank you again. So this is Paul Baines with GreatDad.com. If you're interested in our coaching services for new and older dads, you can find more at GreatDad.com/coaching. And again, check out our new book club at GreatDad.com/books. And until next week, we'll see you then. Bye.